who were born and raised here. Just recently myself, I found myself again last year, with my rental being sold and having to look for housing. It took me 8 months to find a place, and that was that's unheard of. Most people, it takes a lot longer than that to find a place. And here I am, like, an advocate in the housing field, and I can't even find a place for myself and my family. So that just goes to show, everyone is affected by this housing crisis. It's not just folks that that you probably work with. It's not what people would typically think of as, those negative images of lazy homeless folks. That's just not real. It's not a reality. It's case managers, it's housing workers, it's the teachers, educators at the Barnstable High School and all of the local high schools, and nurses, and lots of professional work, firemen, lots of professional working folks who can't find housing on Cape Cod. And it's really, really sad when someone who was born and raised here and has all of their family here, all of their resources here, has to move far away because they can't locate any affordable housing. So that is my spiel. I didn't really have anything prepared. I wasn't sure what the agenda was for today. I will say that Amplify POC is hosting an Access to Justice series in collaboration with the Barnstable Law Association, and one of the workshops is on housing law. And so you can please check out our Instagram and Facebook pages. It's Amplify POC Cape Cod for any upcoming events. But the Access to Justice series really covers a lot of different topics, everything from immigration law to family law, housing law, employment law, and education and juvenile law. And it's really important that we provide these services to communities of color because they are the ones who do not have access to these type of resources. So that's that. Thank you for having us. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Tara and Christy. Are you going to be up here to do your PowerPoint? Christy Centauri from, you're up next, right? Yeah, okay.
All right, thank you. That's a tough one to follow, but I'm going to pull it back a little bit and talk about data. So I am the Executive Director of the Cape Cod Commission, and we are the regional planning agency for Cape Cod. We're also the regulatory and economic development agency for the region. And a lot of what I would like to discuss today has to do with the problem, but then some of the tools that we're going to be implementing over the course of the next several months or so with many of our partners that are up here on the stage to really address the housing crisis. So if you've seen me speak recently about the regional policy plan, about any of our housing work or any of other planning work, I like to start with a series of maps. And so what you're seeing here on the screen is parcel development by decade. So starting around the year 1900 until about 1960s or so, you can see those darker shaded parcels is those parcels on the Cape that were developed. If we go a little bit further, you can see that significant development boom throughout the course of the 1960s through to 1990, and then taking us nearly to present day. Those parcels that are darkly shaded are those parcels across the Cape that have been developed. And so during that same time frame, we were actually pretty good at protecting our open space, and about 90,000 acres or so, about 40% of the Cape is protected open space. But what's interesting is when you take those data layers that show those developed parcels and combine those with those areas that are protected open space, what you see is that 86% of the Cape's land mass is either already protected or already developed. So we know we have this housing crisis, but we know that we need to make sure that we're protecting what's unique and those characteristics and qualities that make Cape Cod such a special place. Paul talked a bit about our coastal and marine water quality, our environmental issues. And those are equally challenging to our housing crisis as well. So while 86% of the land is already protected or developed, that does not leave a lot left for either housing development, any other type of development, or protection. And so if we take a look at what's existing, we saw that 86% of that land was either already developed or protected. We have about 165 or so thousand housing units as of the most recent census. And you can see here, oops, I'll go back one here. You can see the geographic spread there where the mid and upper Cape areas have more of those housing units, and it gets to be a little bit more, a little fewer of those housing units as we move to the outer Cape. Housing typology, that's a phrase that we use. I know that was already mentioned once, but certainly we took a look at the different types of housing that exist across the Cape currently. And about 80%, 82% of our homes across the Cape currently are single family homes. So there's a lack of diversity in the market. And so what that also means is that many of these homes are on either extra small or small home lots. So anything under a half acre is really those extra small lots, and anything under an acre is a small lot home. So certainly we have a prevalence of these extra small and small lots, and 80% or 82% of our housing stock being single family homes. So we have very little other types of housing stock here in the region. And when you compare that to the rest of the state, 52% of the housing across Massachusetts is single family homes, and even the United States, 62%. So we're significantly challenged in that we have very limited housing diversity. We're also seeing fewer homes being built. So this is the percentage of housing stock that was built in about 2010 or later. And so here you're seeing about 2.5% of our housing stock on the Cape was built 2010 or later, compared to the rest of the state and the rest of the country. And then, as was mentioned already as well, we have a highly seasonal housing stock. So 36% of the Cape is seasonal homes. And certainly this is compounding the availability of year-round homes here in the region. And that's significantly higher than what we're looking at in terms of the rest of the Commonwealth, 4.2%, and the rest of the United States at just under 4%. During the pandemic, we had the opportunity to issue a series of surveys to some of the local businesses, to some of the residents. We also conducted a homeowner survey of our second homeowners here in the region, and what we found was less than 4% of the existing second homeowners indicated that they would be interested in renting their house year-round. So certainly we know that many of these data points and facts are just highlighting the issues that we have around availability for year-round homes. And so we can take a look here at that seasonality in terms of a map, and you can see the high of about 71% of the homes in Truro are seasonal homes, down to a low of about 13% in Sandwich. So you can see that spread certainly more on the Outer Cape, which we're all very well aware of. Let's see if I can move forward. Oh, there we go. A little slow here. Okay, so we saw certainly some significant impacts during the pandemic to our real estate market. And so what you're seeing on this graph here is the data points on the left are showing the median sales price for a single family home as that top line. So around January 2019, the median sales price for a single family home was just under $400,000. We had about 1,700 homes on the market. Still a challenging housing market at that time, but you can see that significant jump in median sales price for a single family home throughout the course of the pandemic. And as of March of this year, the median sales price for a single family home was about $700,000. You can see that significant inventory decline on that lower line as well. And so it took a dip around January 2022 with about 230 or so homes on the market. We've gone up a little bit, and currently, as of March of this year, there were about 360 homes on the market. So that's a significant jump in median sales price and a significant decline in the actual number of homes that are available to be purchased on the market. These housing costs are significant, and the household income that would be needed to affordably purchase that median sales price home of about $690,000 or so is $210,000. And you can see here that middle number of $82,000 is what the median household income for the Cape is. So $82,000 compared to what would be needed to affordably purchase the median sales price of the single family home on the Cape. And what I'm sure Elise is going to talk about a little bit too is our rental market. And certainly the median household income from 2021 for renter was just under $44,000. So not only is our housing crisis challenged in terms of purchasing, but those that are renting, looking to purchase into the market are significantly challenged as well. So, what are we doing? We're working with a lot of different partners across the Cape, a lot of the municipalities, a lot of the organizations that are not only impacted by the housing crisis, but really want to do something. And so we have been tasked by a number of organizations and people to develop a regional housing strategy for Cape Cod. So we are currently underway with the development of a regional housing strategy. This has been a recommendation in many of our regional plans. We know we need a dedicated plan to address the housing crisis on Cape Cod. So it's a recommendation in our regional policy plan and in many of our other regional plans as well. So the purpose really is to identify policies and strategies in appropriate areas for housing development, and maybe more importantly, redevelopment, so that we can address our housing supply, affordability, and availability challenges, while also making sure that we're protecting our sensitive resources. The regional housing strategy itself has a number of different components, and these are the different pieces that we're moving forward with the development of currently. We have developed baseline data and information to identify the demographic and economic information for each of the 15 towns, the communities within those towns, as well as for the Cape as a whole. We completed a resident survey, and we're working on a suitability analysis. The middle section there is really that strategy development. There are going to be a number of different strategies that we're going to need to work together to implement to really make sure that we're addressing our housing crisis. We'll be working with a number of stakeholders, and we've already begun this process. We'll also be conducting a housing preference survey, and so in just a moment I'm going to hopefully make a request of a place where you can hopefully help us. We also are identifying strategies from across the country that could potentially be suitable for, that could potentially work here on the region. And we're also developing tools and resources. So many of our towns are interested in developing different types of model bylaws or bylaws that they can adopt. So we're developing models that they could potentially implement. And I'm sure Lisa's going to talk about zoning changes, so I'm going to leave that to her. But certainly we'll be working on a comprehensive zoning analysis so that when our towns are ready to change zoning, we'll have more information to be able to further those conversations. So much of what we're doing is focusing on that missing middle housing. So I mentioned that 82% of our housing stock is single family homes. And so we really want to make sure that we're focusing on those different types of housing typology that could be potentially suitable here on the Cape. So those different types of potential diversity or potential density that we could look to implement here in the region. So this is where we're hoping that you might be able to help, and we're going to be issuing this week an online housing preference survey, and we really want to understand from the citizens, from the people who live here, the community, the people, what types of missing middle housing are appropriate and where within their communities. So this is going to be a visual preference survey as well as an identification of appropriate areas. So go on our website and you can take the survey, you can share it through your networks. It should be available within the first couple of days of this week. If you have any questions or need any help with that, certainly feel free to get in touch with me or other commission staff. And then finally, the baseline data information. I actually have copies of our housing profiles if anyone is interested in one for the entirety of Barnstable County. I'd be happy to share those. This, as I mentioned before, includes all the information about key demographics and economic information, the current housing stock in each of the towns, as well as county-wide, wages, employment, housing affordability, and other key data points that are going to be helpful and informative as we develop solutions to our housing crisis. And then lastly, before we pivot over to Elisa, we're also conducting a housing suitability analysis that's building off a lot of important work that's already been done. So one critical mapping exercise that was conducted by both the Housing Assistance Corporation as well as the Association to Preserve Cape Cod really identified areas that were appropriate for housing development. It's certainly, Elisa can go into some detail there, but really that was a very important step in making sure that the housing organization across the housing advocacy community and the environmental community came together really to identify areas that made sense for potential housing development. So we're going to be furthering some of the mapping work that was done there, and also incorporating some other mapping work that we've done in our regional policy plan, as well as in other regional planning that we've done to date as well. So those are some of the highlights of some of the work that we're doing. We know that this is a crisis. This has certainly been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're looking forward to issuing some recommendations towards the end of the summer, early fall from our regional housing strategy. So feel free to take a look at our website, our data site as well, and if you want a regional profile, I'd be happy to share those at the break. So that's it.
Okay, hi, I'm Elisa Magnat. I'm the CEO of Housing Assistance Corporation. And do we have my slide? Yep, okay, here we go. So, while we get that organized, I wanted to commend the group for having Tara up here to tell a firsthand story. I mean, first of all, her story is amazing and inspiring, and what she's done with her life and how she's transformed her life is nothing short of a miracle, right? But unfortunately, unfortunately, today, people like Tara, we're dealing with thousands of people that are in Tara's situation. And in fact, you don't have to raise your hands, but how many people in your mind, how does your household make less than $200,000 a year? Right? Don't raise your hand. But like we wouldn't be able to live here and afford to live here or come to Cape Cod today. And so I'm really glad that we're sharing the stories of the people, because that's what our organization is concerned about. That's why we're here, is because the people come in our office every day with their kids in tow, with their stuff in their car, desperate for a place to live. As you heard, their rentals sold. That's not a new phenomenon, right? We've had a housing crisis and a housing shortage, and this Cape Cod shuffle that we call, you live in a winter rental and then you camp for the summer and then you go back to the winter rental. We've done that for 20 plus years on Cape Cod. But now, as you heard from Christy, right, we have a shortage because we haven't kept up with production. And I'm going to get a little bit into that. And I want to say that I'm sorry that this is like such a doom and gloom topic. But I think the next session, and Chris will start talking about, and I know Elizabeth will have some examples of things that we've done in Barnstable. Their change is within the grasp of and within our control, right? There are things we can do to change the course. And I'm hoping that that's what this is the beginning of, the fueling of those moments, those small moments in every town where we can change the zoning and make sure that people like Tara, who's grew up here and who's raised her family here and whose kids are here, can stay here. As Paul said, protect the place. We've done a really good job of protecting the place, protecting the environment. We haven't done such a good job of protecting the people and making sure that they can live here. So that's what our mission is save the locals, save the people, make sure that we have the resources. This is Housing Assistance Corporation. We stabilize families, we prevent homelessness, we build housing. We do that in a whole host of programs and resources. We think of ourselves as the ER of housing in the region. So if we don't do it, we know who does. And we ask people, call us, email us, come to our website. It's kind of the first stop. And then we will start to connect to the other resources and other organizations in the region. And I have, our agency's been around for 50 years. I have individuals in my company who have worked there for 30 years. One woman, it was her first job, and she's still there. We have several people who are legitimate experts, right? They've seen the ebb and flow of the housing crisis over the years, when we had the foreclosure problem, when we had when we started to see the short-term rental come into the marketplace and start taking over some of the year-round housing. And so they're saying now, they've never seen it so bad, right? We have individuals, colleagues of mine, who go into encampments and try to motivate and work with people who are legitimately homeless. That caseload just grows exponentially every week. We now have families living in cars throughout the region. We're adding staff in our outreach department as often as we can get funding, because we have working people, normal working people, living in their cars, couch surfing, more than doubling up, tripling up, trying to figure out a way to be productive and to stay living on Cape Cod. And it just, as you go up the economic group, we started with low-income people that we were concerned about. As you get up into the middle class, it's still an issue, right? There's not a quick or fast solution. When Christy pointed out, this is something we've been dealing with for years, tens of years, right? 20, 30 years. So basically, bottom line is we have a mismatch of supply to wages. So people make less money than the houses cost. And that's in a large part due to the way that we're building, the way the regulatory environment that we have with zoning, with single-family homes, right? One house per lot. Means that the price is going to go up because it's a supply and demand issue, especially as we have more people that make a lot more money than we do coming into our region and scooping up our inventory. So there's really no way around it except for to build. I have this slide up here because I wanted to show the buying power of the renters, as Christy was saying, and ask you if I don't know if anyone's been on the housing market lately and knows what rentals are going for, but let's just take the accountant at 64,000, right? So that's 78% AMI, so they would just barely qualify for a subsidy. And they can afford $1,600 a month rent, or to buy, what's that, $230,000. Right? Does anybody know of a 1 or 2 bedroom that's for $1,600 right now? No. I can tell you that we're seeing them go for $2,000, $2,500, and $3,000. So depending on which area and which town you're in on the Cape. So you can see as you make less money, or as a profession that makes less money, it's even harder to get your hands on any kind of inventory, rental or home ownership. And this is in a large part due to the lack of supply. We have not been building enough housing for the people who live here, right? In fact, we're losing people faster than we're building housing for the people who live here. We did a study this past year with the Concord Group, which is an economic group, housing economic group out of California. And one of the big revelations that they found was that we're losing about 1,000 families, 1,000 households a year that make under $100,000, right? And that means that they're going into the housing market and they're realizing there's nothing here for me. There's no way I can support my family. And so they move. Their best chance of success in life is to move and move off Cape. But we're seeing how great that is now with the bridges, right? When over 50% of our workforce is commuting on to Cape Cod, you know that we have a serious problem with inventory, commuting, and the affordability gap. She's giving me my 30 seconds, but I'm not even nearly done. No, I can be done quick. I wanted to say that where the environment that we've set up is, it's a race for housing, right? So imagine musical chairs, right? There's so many chairs. There's always fewer chairs than there are players. So anyone who makes less money, has a broken leg, has a disability, is not white, is not rich, is going to be in another room while the musical chair game is happening in the living room. The rest of us are over here in the kitchen. We can't even get to the game. That's what's happening with housing right now. It's a race for housing. It's a race to try to get anything that people can live in. So we have to build. We have over 200 units in the pipeline right now. Most of them are de-restricted affordable housing because we're very focused on adding inventory. And the thing that we have to do, that this is where we can all get engaged and be part of the solution, is we have to change the rules of the road, right? The first thing anyone has to do when they go to build is they have to get a permit. And so the permit is based on what the allowable use is, and or what you can build on that lot, right? And so if it's not allowable, then you have to go through a really cumbersome, long process to try to get a permit so that you can even break ground. And I'm going to give you one example. We just had a ribbon cutting. We're having a ribbon cutting in May. We just leased out 40 units in Brewster. Guess how, so the land was conveyed for housing, guess how many years ago?
20.
How many?
20.
15 years ago. We started the permitting process 6 years ago, and we just moved people in December. So this is a long race, a long road, right? The first step, the order of operations, the first step is to change the rules so that we can expedite construction. And that's what my friend Chris Lanigan is going to talk about, the private sector and what the building industry needs in order to be successful.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to the League and for the organizations that partnered with the League to bring my colleagues and I together. It's great to be with everyone today. From the building industry's perspective, the market shows that there are haves and have-nots, winners and losers. From those who buy a second house to those who want to live here year-round. Cape Cod, as we all know, is a very desirable place to live. And the building industry here on Cape Cod is really showing that. The market data shows that the building industry is so strong here in Barnstable County. It's unlike most parts of the Commonwealth. It's unlike other areas of New England and really nationwide. And we've actually seen a new somewhat phenomena around that really upholds the data, and that's around acquisitions of lumber yards here on the Cape, acquisitions of suppliers here on the Cape. Because obviously, their market data has shown that the building industry is so strong here, and that's a great thing. You know, we want our economy to be strong. The building industry is the 4th largest employer on Cape Cod. However, that's really a direct link to those who either buy for new construction or remodel for their second home or custom build. But the importance in what my colleagues have laid the foundation of is building housing for people who actually want to call Cape Cod their home. You know, even for myself, my wife and I have 3 kids. We were living in a 700 square foot house, and that's actually a very common thing here on Cape Cod where people are either underhoused or overhoused. And so I was so grateful the day that we learned that we had an accepted offer on a different house was the day that we found out we were having twins. Because I can't imagine having a family of 5 in a 700 square foot house in Dennisport. And Elisa did a good job of kind of explaining the issues facing the building industry around the permitting process, certainly zoning. Time is money in the construction process, right? And just to kind of get a little bit more granular, there are 15 towns on Cape Cod. All 15 towns are snowflakes, right? And they have their own building requirements, their own building regulations on top of state regulations. And so that's actually really hard to navigate, whether you're trying to build single family or multifamily. The other part in this, so town meeting season is upon us, right? To actually build multifamily housing, to diversify our housing stock, as Christy did a good job of explaining the need to do so, we need the infrastructure, right? So in order to build density, we need to have wastewater. Now, my friends in Yarmouth, I see a few of you in the room. Your town meeting is this Tuesday, where the town of Yarmouth will has an article on the warrant that will pursue a $207 million investment in wastewater infrastructure. It is so important for those folks in Yarmouth and in other towns that have wastewater infrastructure articles to show up and to vote for that. There's no other way we're really going to be able to build multifamily housing, to build density, and to do it in a way that won't harm our environment without the wastewater infrastructure. So that's really, really key. I know in Dennis, another town that I represent, we'll be moving forward with wastewater infrastructure and going through the same borrowing process next year. However, at this town meeting in Dennis, which is May 2nd, we'll be pursuing 2 municipally owned lots and putting affordable housing restrictions on them. Both of the lots are sizable. Both of them are great for multifamily housing development. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, particularly at the local level, is NIMBYism, right? So I'm a select board member. I have been through countless hearings or have attended planning board meetings where there are so many people who are against housing development. The one phrase that I often hear is, I don't want those people living in my neighborhood. Now, that is a classist statement, and I would even argue that that is a racist statement. And so for us, not only can we, municipalities and even at the state level, you can only do so much. You really need to have the desire and the will from those who live in the towns to actually do something about housing and to support housing projects and to support zoning changes in your own town in order to build multifamily housing. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, since I also wear a state representative hat, some exciting things from the Healy-Driscoll administration. They're looking to actually have a housing secretary that is solely dedicated to housing development here, not just on Cape Cod, but throughout the Commonwealth. They've also talked about taking some state-owned parcels of land that they own and designating them for affordable housing development, which I think there are some parcels on Cape Cod that we could pursue. And so I think that those are some bright spots. The other thing that I'll say, and I say this as a newly elected legislator, there are so many of my colleagues who really want to do something about housing. And I think that from the pieces of legislation that I've seen, including one that I filed around redevelopment, Paul Nizwicki did a great job about talking about the need for redevelopment. And my bill really takes structures, right, that are already existing, whether it's a church or a hotel or an old plaza, and incentivizing redevelopment for multifamily housing, particularly for rural and suburban areas. And so with that, I think that to Elise's point, sometimes housing is a complex issue and this can feel somewhat heavy, but I actually think as many challenges that there are around housing, there are certainly, I think, a lot of opportunities, particularly here on Cape Cod. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and I hope during that time you can write down your questions. There's some index cards floating around. And when we come back, we'll be hearing from Elizabeth Jenkins and Michael Macinas and Elisa again. Thank you. ready to resume?
All right, take my seat. Nice to see you too, all right?
Yes, there's just this Elizabeth Jenkins, the Barnstable Director of Planning, Michael Messinas, the President of Health Ministries, and Elisa again, and then we'll go to Q&A. You can hear me? Next we have Elizabeth Jenkins, the Barnstable Director of Planning and Development, followed by Michael Messinas, President of the Health Ministries, and then we'll go back to Elisa. So, thank you, Elizabeth.
Hi, good afternoon. Again, I'm Elizabeth Jenkins, and I am the director for the Town of Barnstable's Planning and Development Department. And the Planning and Development Department in the town really looks at the interconnectedness of land use and infrastructure, in the environment and economic development, and puts those, translates all those issues into policy on the local level. So first I just want to say thank you to the League and also Barnstable No Place for Hate for connecting me with this group and inviting me onto their steering committee. Really, I think it's their awareness and advocacy around the importance of not just housing security, but housing security, food security, and health equity, and the interrelationship between those things and how they advance that group's mission. That is so important, and again, thank you for building connections and partnerships in our community, because I think that is how we start to make progress on all of these issues, especially housing. So again, Planning and Development Department on the local level, just to really think about how it connects with some of the regional planning that Christy Senatori talks about. We really take that data and that mapping that we see all across Cape Cod, and we take that out to our community, and we engage local communities around what that means in terms of the way that Barnstable and towns like Barnstable are going to grow and change. And really, this starts through a process of master planning, or as we call it on Cape Cod, local comprehensive planning, which sets out a vision for growth, for development, for resource protection, and the provision of infrastructure in all of our towns on Cape Cod. So Barnstable's in a fantastic position where we are going through this process right now. Towns do it about every 10 years. Barnstable is not the only community that is doing this. I know there are a number of towns on the Cape sort of coming out of the new county plan that are updating their local comprehensive plans. But please, if you see these efforts happening in your communities, pay attention and get involved, because they really are, again, setting out the vision for what our communities are going to look like in the next 10 to 20 years, understanding what's important to our residents, and then taking those priorities and then turning them into local action for our policymakers. So again, the Town of Barnstable is doing this right now with a fantastic local comprehensive planning committee. Again, that's looking at the interrelationships between housing, between the environment, and is really, we're sort of still in the beginning phases of this. We're in the visioning process, but setting out a very ambitious vision to meet the needs of the people who are living in our community today, while not compromising the environment that's so special on Cape Cod. So that's sort of on the town policy level where this starts. And then housing, when we talk about housing, there's a local process as well that cities and towns go through the development of local housing production plans. And that's, again, really digging deep into that data, thinking about what our local housing needs are and how we are going to meet the affordable housing needs of our community. the Commonwealth of Massachusetts sets out that all cities and towns should have at least 10% of their housing stock be permanently deed restricted affordable housing. So when we put together a housing production plan, we're looking at what are the tools and strategies we need to make that happen, but also, how do we meet housing needs in all of our community? Because we've seen a lot of examples today of, yes, there's sort of that core need, but seasonal workforce and people who are, making just over those income restricted levels. How do we plan and provide housing for them too? And Barnstable is also in the process of updating our housing production plan. We really have 3 major strategies that we use when we're thinking about housing production, and we've heard them all talked about today. Really zoning, use of municipal property, and then incentives for affordable housing. So on the zoning side, I'll just share a couple of things that Barnstable has done. And again, these are the rules that guide what can be built in cities and towns, come from that zoning ordinance. And zoning for housing can look like a lot of different things. It can look like very small scale infill. We've seen a lot of progress on accessory dwelling units across the Cape. So maybe it's just, one infill unit on one lot, or maybe it's something larger. I'm very proud that the Barnstable Town Council very recently passed unanimously zoning in downtown Hyannis that will allow housing. That doesn't look like anything else on the Cape. It is by right, so come in and get a building permit, really cutting down that process to as minimal as possible. So it's by right, multifamily, 4-story zoning with what we call form-based provisions baked in. So the housing that we're building isn't just really responsive to what can be built in the market, but also builds that character of our community. And again, this is happening in downtown Hyannis, an area where, that checks the box in terms of the availability of sewer infrastructure. Putting new housing where our small businesses are, so we're reinforcing both our housing needs and our economic development needs, and allowing people to live where they work. So, again, creating a place that is that is walkable to reduce reliance on the automobile, and creating housing not just for the sake of creating housing, but for the sake of creating community and place. Which is really what we're building there. So these are some of the zoning tools that we've put in place. We're looking, now that we've done this, what's next. Again, zoning, the second strategy that we've heard about today is the use of municipal property for housing. It costs a lot right now to build housing on the Cape. The land costs a lot. The labor to build the housing costs a lot. The construction materials cost a lot. And now borrowing costs more than it did before. So when municipalities can contribute land to housing, they're taking out one of those major costs and making it more affordable. So Barnstable is doing this now on a really small scale, 1 lot or 2 lots here or there, but there's some great examples of towns who are being more aggressive, who are getting into the market, purchasing property. I know Provincetown has done this, I know Orleans has done this. So it's a really great examples of how municipalities in the public sector can start to compete on a local level to make affordable housing possible in our communities. And the last piece of this is incentives. How do we use public sector funds to help encourage the inclusion of affordable housing in new development? In Barnstable, we require 10% of all of our new housing units to be deed restricted affordable, and everything else is market rate. But how do we increase that number and still make sure that housing is financially feasible to be able to be constructed? We could make that number bigger, but if we see it dampen housing production, we're fighting against what we're supposed to be solving. So we have some great tools. Many towns on the Cape now have affordable housing trusts. We have our trust administrator today that are using funding sources like the Community Preservation Act to be able to continue to subsidize housing in new development. But one of the challenges is, you've heard of this idea of housing typology. A lot of the housing that I think we have heard that people in the town want, and that's most appropriate for Cape Cod, is that smaller scale housing. It's not necessarily the big project that a national developer comes in. It's that infill housing, that reuse of existing property. And the developers who are doing this are most likely local developers, people who live in our community who just, really care about housing. And they have trouble really working through the bureaucracy of affordable housing. So how do we create new models, new programs, and new funding sources to be able to change the way we traditionally do affordable housing in our community? And that's really what Barnstable is working at. Again, shoring up and making sure we have a great program to do the sort of traditional affordable housing, but how do we bring new programs to the table? And that's where legislative advocacy comes in as well. If we had sources like a transfer tax on high-end real estate, if we had the ability to put year-round deed restrictions on property, that's going to give local municipalities a lot more tools to be able to be creative when it comes to affordable housing, and really to be able to realize that idea of how do we create housing that feels appropriate for Cape Cod, but is also serving the needs of the people who live there. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Messinas. I am the president and founder of the Health Ministry, a nonprofit organization that provides service for the low income and also immigrants on the Cape, as myself. I came here back in 1998, and here I am. And it's amazing to see how our community has changed, how diverse we became. But yes, indeed, we are dealing with this crisis, which is the housing crisis. And with that, my part in this panel is to invite the residents to be part of the solution. Not just talk about the problem, but actually show up, be part of the solution. There is an estimate of 23,000 Brazilians on the Cape. I was amazed to hear my colleagues said that unfortunately some people with a closed mentality said, I don't want those people here. Well, they are here, and they are coming. So what can we do to be part of the solution? What can we do? Show up for town meetings. This whole house, should be pretty full, and here we are, we can see some empty seats. So as we heard and saw with our own eyes, the crisis is here. And the problem is here, but what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do with all the statistic and all the things that was presented to us as a resident of Cape Cod, knowing that there is a change, knowing that those people are here and they're here to stay. I'm also work at Cape Cod Hospital. I'm part of the workforce there. There is a huge problem now, try to find employees. So what are we going to do with that? And the majority of immigrants that I represent, they're here to stay. They're not here season. And yes, there is a problem. So my message today is to invite all the residency to from Cape Cod to first show up, be participant in things like this, show up to the meetings, apply to be a member of a planning board like I am for myself, which is an honor for me to be part of a planning board of a town of Barnstable, which is something that I never thought about doing it, but here I am doing it, and it's amazing. The stuff that I've learned and the things that was presented to me and been presented to me every time is just like a light bulb. So I just want to ask you all, when we're done with this, think about it. How can I be proactive? How can I participate? How can I be involved? And how can I also, be open-minded? Yes, we do have a problem, but we also have to be flexible and open-minded because those people are here and they are here to stay. Thank you very much.
And I'm glad that they're here and here to stay, right? We all are, so thank you for that. It is something, the community that we live in, we have an obligation and also an honor to be able to participate in the decision-making in our towns. And many people, my friends, colleagues, myself included, we don't like going to these meetings, right? They're time-consuming, they're boring, it's dreadful. Sorry, Elizabeth, no offense. but zoning rules, really, I mean, it's something, it's this heady theoretical thing that you gotta get your mind around to understand, and then try to understand what the impact of the rules are. There's so many other things to do with your time. But because we're not participating in watching the till and watching what's happening, right, we end up with unintended consequences of a place that none of us could afford to live in if we had to enter Cape Cod today. So exactly, it's getting involved. That is the number one thing for us to do in the local comprehensive plan, in our town meetings, sitting on a board, showing up here, bringing a friend to town meeting. So we started an initiative called Housing to Protect Cape Cod because we were sick and tired of sitting around talking about the problem, right? How many years have you all been hearing about this problem? Usually one of the props I bring is our annual report from 1985. It has headlines, ripped out headlines from the newspapers in that year. You could literally just erase 1985 and put 2023. They're the exact same headlines. Shortage, crisis, mismatch of wages, on and on and on and on. So I'm an action-oriented person. I don't want to sit around and talk about the problem for too long. We've analyzed it to death. We know what needs to be done. So we put a group together of other like-minded organizations, the chamber, the home builders, the realtors. We came together and formed a group that could think about what are the issues that we could take on together, zoning issues, funding issues, that we could take on together and advocate for throughout our region. Thankfully, the commission also started their great work around the same time. So while they're putting their housing plan together, the recommendations that we will adopt when their work is done, in the meantime, we're flexing our muscle on advocacy, right? We're getting our troops together, we're getting people trained to learn how to speak, to learn how to be on boards, to learn the dreadful details of these decisions that have to be made so you can be informed and make good decisions for all of us, right? So this is what our group is focused on. We're focused on housing production for middle income and low income residents on Cape Cod. And it's not easy. I have to tell you, housing is very complex. There's a lot of facets to it. As you've heard, it touches so many pieces of our lives, right? Our outcomes on our children's education, on health, social determinants of health, right? It touches so much of our life, not to mention our economy and the way of life in our communities that we all benefit from here on Cape. So we really took some time to think about what are the overlapping issues and concerns that we should have in our approach to make sure that we're advocating and staying in our lane and advocating for the right kind of housing in the right places. As you heard from Christy, you heard from Elizabeth, this balance of our environment and the critical habitats and the clean water is very, very important to us. It is something that we take very seriously. We have a weatherization department in my company where we do the low-income weatherization and energy audits for people to bring down their energy bill and reduce their carbon footprint. It's embedded in our mission and what we do. We spent 2 years working with the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, looking at where we absolutely, based on facts, need to conserve and preserve land. And there are places that we absolutely should never have built, and we will never advocate for building, right? But there are places where we all know that the land does not have environmental value and would be better off for housing. And those are the places that we are focused on for building. So we have a multi-pronged strategy and approach. And part of it is coming together in a group. It's coming together with facts. We hire economists, we hire experts, we get informed on our messaging, we get informed on the way that we approach housing, and we approach construction and what we're advocating for throughout the region, and make sure that what we're saying is based on science, based on data, and is based on something that we can recommend to our colleagues in the community. So these are examples of the report that we published with our housing economists and the report that we published with Association to Preserve Cape Cod. And that picture is our launch of Housing to Protect Cape Cod in November, where we had, 400 people or so coming together to talk about the need for housing and trying to get organized, to mobilize people. Like, this is our time. If we don't do it now, likely none of us will be here in 5 years, 10 years. There comes a point where we're gonna all be incentivized to sell our homes, right? My house is now $1 million more valuable than when I bought it. $1 million. Like, there's a point, like, when am I gonna get that $1 million again in my life, right? Like, you start, your self-interest starts to kick in, and it would be very easy to sell and relocate. And we've seen that by the thousands. That's what's happening. People are being incentivized to sell their number one asset and make a better investment for their family and for themselves. No judgment, right? But we've got to do something to shift the market to make sure that we have a year-round community and we have year-round housing that's in the right places like village centers. So this is a way that people can get involved, get engaged, right? Get educated, get engaged, get mobilized. We're training people to be speakers. We're training people to be leaders on boards, and we're convening people in a social environment so that you're not alone when you go up against the opposition, right? I've been on those meetings where there's like 3 housing advocates and 70 environmentalists, right? It's daunting to sit there and listen to the same arguments over and over, and it's daunting as a housing advocate to not have people who need the housing and who would benefit from the housing coming on. It's because, as I think somebody said, they're all working 3 jobs to live here, right? So this is where the rest of us who know that it's a problem and that we have the time, this is our time to help our community. It's our time to help those people who need to be lifted up and that we need to celebrate and keep in our community. So I invite you to become part of the solution and join us. We're also doing municipal leader education to make sure that the people that are on these committees are fully informed and have the best access to data and resources. So we have a multi-pronged approach to our education and mobilizing as well. And I hope you'll join us, because this is about us, right? I'm sure most of the people here are stably housed, so this is for the people who are not. And it's our community and our future. And I hope you'll be part of the solution. Thank you.
All right, now we have some questions, and there's a microphone down there, and there's this microphone up here on the table. I don't know who would answer this, but what financial resources are available to Cape Towns to address workforce housing? What financial resources?
What financial resources? Tell me more. I need to know more about the question.
Yeah, I do too. What financial resources? Are there loans? I don't know.
Do you want to say
Grants?
something, Elizabeth? Yeah.
So I can tell you about some of the traditional resources. So most Capes on the town have opted into the Community Preservation Act, and I would say that's probably the primary financial resource that Cape municipalities use to promote affordable housing. There's a certain percentage of that money that can be contributed to affordable housing in a community. Again, having to be deed restricted affordable housing at 80%. And a lot of the towns now, again, have affordable housing trusts that have been put in charge of administering this housing. So I would say that is probably the most traditional. Again, I think there need to be a lot of other, there needs to be a diversification of those funding sources. I know the county has recently come forward with a plan to use American Rescue Act money for affordable housing, workforce housing, and homelessness stabilization. So again, that's a great opportunity to sort of look outside that traditional affordable housing box. But much of the public subsidy that is in there, again, is aimed at creating units that are for 100% of the AMI or below. It's where you start to, where you start to make gains above that it becomes more and more difficult. We have seen some towns trying to change the rules around using Community Preservation Act funds so you can increase the incomes that are available for publicly subsidized units, but definitely agree that there needs to be a diversification of funding sources to allow for more public sector influence on workforce housing.
Would there be any state or federal funds coming in?
Again, the most of those are largely aimed at, again, affordable or addressing issues of homelessness. So home funds or community development block grant funds in many communities. But again, it's that workforce housing piece that becomes harder and harder. There are some programs through some of our state agencies, Mass Housing and Mass Housing Partnership, that provide essentially developer subsidies to be able to buy down units. We've seen, those are mostly aimed towards much sort of larger scale development that we see on the Cape, so haven't seen a ton of examples of those, but I know there are groups trying to get into that.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was for individuals or more like housing development. That's where I just
Workforce housing, it says.
to build it or for someone who's employed.
It just says to address it.
Okay. So there would be, like Elizabeth is saying, the building subsidy, and then the other side would be a voucher or a subsidy to help pay rent. And that's where it starts to be complicated because it depends on how much the person makes, right, for what they would qualify for. But I don't know if this is someone that's in need of assistance, but they can call our office and we can help walk them through the programs that are available.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Is that on?
Chris.
Just wanted to add very briefly two things. One, we have some municipal electeds that I just wanted to highlight that are here. Matt Levesque with Barnstable Town Council, as well as Paula Schnepp, I saw her earlier. I also saw our district attorney, Rob Gallibois, who was here earlier. I'm not sure if he still is. But one thing that, and Alyssa, I know that we've talked about this before, there's one, was there anybody that I missed? Oh, sorry. And Elizabeth Harder, I saw her earlier too. And if there's anyone else, feel free to wave. One thing that municipalities don't take advantage of through the short-term rental tax is actually dedicating some of those funds towards housing. A number of municipalities put aside that money towards wastewater, which is very important, but certainly that's one thing that I think that people could advocate for, is for municipalities, rather than having those funds go just into the general operating budget, for them to be designated for housing. So I think that's an important piece that municipalities on the Cape don't take advantage of. Thank you.
Thanks. Why is it so difficult? Why is it so difficult to get housing zoned for 2-story apartment buildings with affordable units? How much NIMBYism account for this as wealthier people buy here?
Well, there's so much there. Why is it so difficult? I mean, next to zoning, the number one reason why housing isn't built is because of the neighbors that oppose housing. So, making those changes to make that an allowable use is something that needs to go through the local comprehensive plan, or to get people who are pro-housing on the right boards and who can make sure that they're advocating for and pushing those policies forward.
Thanks, Lisa. What is being done to encourage municipalities to increase ADUs and decrease B&Bs?
Well, the decreasing B&Bs we're not really focused on, because you can't dictate the use of someone's business or building. But for our agency, we're working on accessory dwelling units, and the model bylaw that was created by Governor Baker during the housing choice legislation, and working with towns throughout the region to try to expand their look at accessory dwelling units, and the lot size and the use, and making them more relevant for what the community needs today, and what we hear from a lot of homeowners, that they would like to have a smaller apartment that makes, has income attached to it on their property. Right now we have over 200 households